Iowa's News Now Sports brings you black and gold glory. Your all-access pass to all things Hawkeyes. This is Eye on the Hawks.
Episode 2, how do you do? Welcome to Eye on the Hawks. Mitch Fick here with Owen Sebring, and this is the one where we're in work clothes. It's a Thursday night, so we're working the day jobs right now. The beginning of a interim era, at least for the time being in Iowa City. Not the beginning, so to speak. About 2 weeks in now to Beth Goetz taking over as interim AD. Gary Barter retiring on August 1st after 17 years exactly as athletic director in Iowa City. She had her introductory press conference today. You were there, Owen. Mm-hmm. First impressions, obviously, as we talked about during our newscast, a lot on her plate as she takes over as interim.
To be quite frank, I had forgotten that she was an interim AD. It felt like
transparency is the name of the game here.
Yeah, honestly, when Matt Weitzel was up there introducing her and he said something about interim, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, she is interim. I mean, for some reason in my mind, it feels like
it's been set in stone for a few months now, and then Gary not retiring until August, and so it's felt official for a while, and now it's officially official, and here we go.
Officially official that she's interim, but for some reason it kind of feels like a foregone conclusion that she'll be,
definitely the front runner for sure.
But we'll see down the road. But anyway, I mean, the biggest thing for me was the stuff about the gambling, and literally those two words that she mentioned early in the presser, saying that we're days away. That was my biggest takeaway. The thing that at least stuck out to me the most, saying that how's it go? We've submitted all the requested information to the NCAA, optimistic that we're hopefully days away from getting some feedback initially on what this means for our student athletes who are currently here and have remaining eligibility. So, I mean, that seems crazy that she would give that short of a timeline, potentially saying within the next, when I hear days away, I would think within the next week that we'll hear something about potential punishments that'll be levied against them.
There's probably a legal debate. Yeah, define days away. Yeah. What did you mean by that?
Defining the word few. Is few 2, 6? What?
So Big Ten football, at least, I know Minnesota, Indiana kicks off 2 weeks from tonight. They start Thursday night in Minneapolis. So I would think for those teams that do get started a little earlier, 48 hours difference there, but I would think they would want to start, and there's probably some games next week too, I would imagine, some smaller schools, something like
maybe
that.
Some FCS games.
You'd want to at least get some guidance out there. So yeah, I think you're right. That timeline, days away in this case, probably means within the next week or so. I think last Thursday is when we started getting the Arlen Bruce and the Reggie Bracey news and everything else out of Ames. So maybe that would be it.
Even her saying that, maybe she's saying days away and saying that as a long-term option. It could be tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, it could be Saturday. Who knows?
For sure. So let's listen to Beth Goetz. Again, one of the first things she talked about during today's presser, talking about the state of the gambling investigation and Iowa's place in it.
On the reinstatement process specifically, we have submitted all the requested information to date to the NCAA. And we're optimistic that we are just hopefully days away, perhaps, from getting some feedback, at least initially, on what that means for our student athletes who currently are here and have remaining eligibility. There's obviously some additional steps in the process once that decision is rendered, but we're optimistic that might happen here in short order as opposed to a few weeks down the road.
Once they switched up topics, she was asked again kind of about gambling and just what the state of NCAA athletics is going to be with the world we live in now. We've heard Kirk Ferentz mention it a number of times during Media Day last week. The world's changing. This is just the world we live in, where it is legal to bet on games, and that's a tough thing to shy people away from if they're A, of age, and B, it's an app on your phone. You can order your dinner and then throw 20 down on the Hawks. It's the simplicity of it is what makes it so available and probably so enticing to people that you don't even think about it when it's an app. She did talk about the idea that we do think there's going to be an evaluation of how these rules are applied from the NCAA level, how we educate, how frequently, what that mechanism is. She says that she thinks that will be important. And she continued to stress as well, and we've heard Kirk talk about this, the integrity of the game. That is pinnacle and foremost in front of everything. But she also, again, pointed out the environment that those young men and the women are living in, being bombarded with advertisements and all of the online gaming opportunities. I think it was Mike Halas snapped a photo up in the box that we were in for Kinnick Stadium at the media day that had some sort of betting promo up on the wall. It is all over the place. Yeah. It's a tough thing to avert your eyes from, no matter if you're an NCAA student athlete or whoever you may be. So it'll be very interesting as this investigation wraps up, question mark, in these days ahead, and we get some finality to some of these decisions of what the NCAA is going to do, more so than just that updated guidance that we got about 2.5, 3 months ago.
Yeah, she echoed some of the things that were good points made by Coach Ferentz, just that it is an ever-changing world of gambling that we're living in, where it's going to be all around us, and there's going to be gambling to some degree with a lot of people. And so just narrowing in some of the guidelines about how we can maybe adjust some of these rules for these kids. I mean, I think that it was Ferentz that even made the comparison to like marijuana. I mean, just with the changing rules, the legality that changes for marijuana, that, you know, there are some changes that maybe need to be made there. And so same thing kind of needs to go for gambling here, as much as an old school thinker would want things to be just like zero gambling at all costs. But just again, with the world we're living in, I mean, that just is not tenable anymore.
So we'll see what happens there in terms of numbers of games or punishments or anything like that. But the big number people still talking about as Beth Goetz takes over is 25, as in points per game, 7 wins. Those are those stipulations and that new addendum to Brian Ferentz's contract that was announced back during the BARDA era, so to speak, a few months ago. She came straight out and said that language is still in the contract, that if those numbers aren't met, contract is going to be terminated, I believe, end of June or end of July, sometime after the 23 campaign. She spoke a little more just about getting those questions about Brian Ferentz's status. He does report to her as the interim athletic director, a little bit more about that situation that all of Hawkeye Nation continues to perpetually weigh in on.
Is the contract provision still in place, the 25 points per game?
It is.
Is that still in? Okay.
So following up off that, if he doesn't hit 25 points per game, are you planning on following that, or?
Well, let me lead with this. His goal, and I know because I've sat down with him, I sat down with Kirk, and really the goal of every coach that we have here is to win games, right? And I'm 100% convinced, I was going into those conversations, I was going out, that their focus is on how do we win football games and how do we develop these young men. And so, you know, as we look at those types of things, just like we would in any sport, you're going to evaluate a season at the end and see how you did. But the goal is to win along the way. You know, I've won some ugly games as a coach, and I never gave any of them back. But I'm confident. I know they're excited. I know you all have now had a chance to see that team. We're excited about what they're going to do in the field, and we understand it's unique. We understand it's going to be talked about a lot, but it's just not something we're going to be thinking about. You know, week in and week out. We're going to cheer for the team, support the program, support our coaches the way we always do, and, you know, we'll evaluate at the end of the season.
Something that really stood out to me about her answers about Brian, because she got asked a few times about him, and every question she got today, she was very, like, open and had, you know, long answers, detailing anything that she thought, but the first couple questions she got about Brian were very short. You know, you heard the first question about the 25 points, just saying, yep, that's still in place. She had another question asking about his contract will be handled in the same way as Gary. She just said, that's correct. Brian does now report directly to me. So just really keeping it as brief as humanly possible in some of those questions, and until John Steppe came in and, you know, really asked her to detail a little bit more about that contract. And so they might not be thinking about that 25 points, but since they released that contract stipulation to the public, that still is what a lot of fans are going to be thinking about.
So the question, and this has been floated out there too, is it a distraction that there's we've even jokingly and maybe halfway seriously talked about having a little points counter in the corner of one of our graphics here, just talking about it. Do you think the fact that it's staying in there, I wasn't expecting her to immediately come out and be like, oh yeah, that's out of there. Like, I don't think she would undermine Gary that way. I think that's how I personally would think it might be viewed, of just like, oh yeah, he did that. That was dumb. Get it out of here. Do you think it's a distraction that that's still in there?
There's just no way that it's not a distraction, or at least not on their mind to a certain extent. It's the same
Who's
thing.
they when you say that? Just to, you think Brian? Kirk?
Brian, Kirk, the football team in general. I mean, anybody on the offense, I think, at least has that in their mind, because that contract stipulation has been made so public. It's the same way, and I'd say the same thing for any football team at any level that talks about something that's not being a distraction. that means it's a distraction, or at least it's on their mind. When I hear a team that just won a state title last year say like, oh, we're not really thinking about last year. We're not thinking about that. That's not on our mind. I'm like, come on. It is to a certain extent. I understand that that's not going to be your focus and what you want to talk about all the time, but it's still hard to just like completely erase that from your memory. You just can't get that out of your head. And so that's why it was so like, as much as I think the fans kind of wanted to maybe hear something like that back in the winter about an updated contract for Brian, you do have to sometimes question, like, was it the best move to release that to the public? Because now that's all that everybody seems to be thinking and talking about with the offense this fall.
And it's an easy thing to talk about. I think from a fan and consumer and social media poster standpoint, I think that's just an easy thing to, in this dunk on culture, you know what I mean? Of like, oh, well, we'll just, now we've got an actual number to kind of base everything around instead of just people tweeting Fire Brian whenever they feel bad about something connected to black and gold. Literally everything is just in the comments. Now you've got this number to kind of hang a hat on, so to speak. I think everybody's totally aware of it. I don't think it's a distraction in the sense of like, that's all they're thinking. Like it's this dread, this, death's door knocking behind them of like 25, it's gotta be 25. I think they're aware of it. I also think it's kind of a moot point. Like if they don't have a good offense and they don't win 7 games, he's going to be contractually.
Yeah.
It's going to be over. I also think maybe it's a case of, I'm purely speculating. I know nothing about any of this. Maybe he's already gone after next year, and maybe that's his internal decision. We've talked about John Budmayer. He's now the assistant to the head coach. He's a former OC. He's kind of the reason Cade and Deacon are there. Maybe he's kind of waiting in the wings, and Brian has decided, this has just been. Maybe he's sick of handling. I mean, we've heard him talk about this stuff so much, and has asked about upsides and things like that. Maybe that's the case of just like, listen, why change it? Because we kind of know what's going to happen after the season anyways. Maybe that's me purely speculating. I don't think it's that big of a distraction to the team until people bring it up over and over. Yeah, they know the number and it's public and everything, but do I think they're going to be haunted by like, we have to run one more play because we're only up 21-17? Because that was the narrative that got out.
Will it impact the game though? Like if it's,
Do you
Iowa's.
think it will? The people that are like,
I'm not sure though. If it's late in the fourth quarter and say it's 21-10 or 13 Iowa and we have the ball and it's 7 minutes left, are we gonna, you see Kirk Ferentz sit, not sit, but like run the ball 3 times.
2 touchdowns in like 5 minutes against Purdue last year and sat on it for 2.5 quarters. You know what I mean?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Are they gonna third quarter? Are they gonna go for it? Are they gonna have Cade throw it around?
Asking for change ever since we went spread against Pitt in 2011 to come back and win.
I mean, as a fan, I would love to see that because I was,
every late fourth quarter touchdown that changes it from like 24 to 27, like a field goal or something. Like everything's going to get that Bronx cheer.
It's the first question in the press conference after the game. Yeah. Like if almost every game, if there's a play like that. So
I think that's when it becomes a quote unquote distraction. Is when like people like start, I couldn't help but notice like you did that little score like that. But otherwise, like, do I think play calling is going to be dictated by we have to hit our magic number? Like, would he start now in year 25 doing stuff like that? I don't think so.
Even if it is, I'm like, is anybody upset about that? Like, who's upset about them scoring more points?
Scored more points.
Unless we get a turnover in a 1-score game, that's the only time it's going to be like, well, you shouldn't have had the contract. You can see the fans saying that.
I think they're going to play football, and I think we all agree, assuming everybody's healthy, like the offense has no place to go but up. So
we hope.
We'll revisit this. Maybe this will get clipped. I don't know what's going to go on. The other big topic that came up and has certainly been talked about throughout the summer, NIL and the Swarm Collective. A lot of talk about that. They are just brewing as much beer as possible to pack into Kinnick now, it sounds like. Gary Barta very infamously didn't fully embrace the Swarm Collective and was maybe in a wait-and-see mode on NIL. Beth today talking to the folks at Swarm themselves.
It's been wonderful to at least start to build a relationship with Brad. I know many of us on our staff had already had an opportunity to do that. But really, when it comes to name, image, and likeness, it's just a critical piece for our student athletes and our success competitively. No different than the generosity that's coming in through NIL gifts and through the Swarm and in other ways. It's just as important these days as scholarships and facilities and other operational needs. But really what Brad and his team have done I think has really given us a chance to be really successful. And the way that they did it, if you look across the country, many of the other collectives didn't quite have the same success right out of the gate. I think they've been very thoughtful. His team is almost in daily conversation sometimes with ours and has been, but we're just really appreciative of his efforts, of all of those who've chosen to contribute there.
That's probably not understating the importance of NIL right now.
Yeah, it's a big aspect of college sports right now in general. I think that she knows that coming in, that's going to be a big part of the questions that she receives. It seems like we can't hardly make it through any Kirk Ferentz presser or Fran McCaffrey presser without somebody asking about, so what do you think about NIL? What do you think about the transfer portal? And she knows that that's going to be a huge part of her future and some of the decisions she's going to have to make going forward.
And again, that relationship with Swarm and NIL and seemingly embracing it immediately, a little separate from what we saw from Gary Barta, who was kind of in a wait-and-see mode. Not the only difference between their backgrounds. You heard her kind of allude to it earlier, but Beth had a pretty darn successful coaching stint back before she got into the administrative side. Barta himself was an athlete, I believe, at North Dakota State, where he was a journalism major. Could easily be... If he's in retirement and he wants to be a guest on the pod, come on, Gary, we need the
You want
content.
to shoot some Friday Night Football games for us?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we need Eastern Iowa OT assistance, certainly. But Beth certainly bringing her own perspective into everything. Let's hear from her talking about just the evolution of college athletics and what she sees from her perspective during her time on the admin side.
Needs to evolve. And what that means for how we share resources with student athletes and what the actual pathway is for that to happen remains to be seen. But I also believe, and I don't think these two things are mutually exclusive, I think we can provide greater resource, greater revenue opportunities, whether that's within or outside the athletic department, and still embed this experience with the components that make it, that tie it to education, and make it different than pro sports. Student athletes not being paid is not the only thing distinctive about college athletics and between that and pro sports.
That was one of the big bites you talked about, the days away thing. That was a big line for me, is being paid is not the only separation between collegiate and athletics. I think there's this narrative out there, and it's been out there for probably longer than you and I have been alive, of, well, once you pay these athletes, like the sanctity of collegiate sports is gone, the tradition of it's gone. Like, is it?
Yeah.
Is it?
I mean, college sports have always evolved, and that's they're going to continue to evolve. I mean, yeah, there are different ways in which you could point to the sanctity. I mean, somebody in 1950 might have looked back and said, like, oh, they're ruining college football by putting face masks on the helmets. I mean, there's a lot of things that have changed over the years that, are you could, again, make an argument for good or bad, but college sports change over time, and that's just the nature of how it goes.
That's how it's gone. And certainly there's been talk about, as the Big Ten expands, what happens to some of those non-con rivalry games. Like, there's ways to have your cake and eat it too, it feels like. I don't think that's out of the question, but certainly she brings in her perspective on what needs to happen there, and also talked a lot about just her journey to Iowa, again, coming from Ball State. She was the AD there for 4 years. Before that, she was an interim AD at Minnesota during a somewhat tumultuous time up there in the Twin Cities for Gopher Athletics. She's been here now. I think she said her first official day was September 30th of last year, so she's just about 10 and a half months in, and certainly had been here a little bit in some capacity at Iowa during her time in Minnesota. She actually said she was at Grapple on the Gridiron talking about
that's right.
Talking about the crossover at Kinnick. She was in town because Minnesota played Iowa that night. Iowa won that game to go to 10-0. So she joked a little bit about having lost some athletic endeavors in Iowa, but she talked about just the word she used was uncommon when it came to Hawkeye athletics and the people she emphasized within the community.
Over my short time here, I have been just incredibly impressed by our student athletes, our coaches, our staff. We've got an amazing fan base and such a generous group of donors. And I think the combination of their passion, their talents, and their characters, really, it's uncommon. And it's what makes being a Hawkeye so special. And I'm so glad that I have an opportunity to be part of that here.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of changes coming to Iowa athletics, and we're in a time where there's so many events, so many big names in the sport, in the athletics world at the University of Iowa. And you mentioned earlier the big number that we focused on today was 25, but I was thinking the big number that stuck out to me was 30,000. That we've already got 30,000 tickets sold to the crossover at Kinnick, which is, what is it, 2 months away? Is it
October 15th, so a little less than 2 months.
Yeah.
Day after the Iowa-Wisconsin game.
So that I like that you pointed out this in the newscast earlier, that already surpasses the highest attended women's basketball game of all time, which is 29,000.
29.6 and change. That was at the Alamo Dome down in San Antonio, the 0-2 national title game between UConn and Oklahoma. So the fact that in 48, 54 some hours since tickets were first available, that they've already had 30,000 people.
Yeah.
For comparison, Grapple at the Gridiron, Oklahoma State and Iowa back in 2015, that was, I think, 42-2 or something like that. So, I mean, they could sell out Kinnick
Smash that
Stadium.
probably.
I mean, that's 2 days. They're just starting to get out to the general public. There's been talk of, like, maybe moving the court to midfield, because at Grapple at the Gridiron, the wrestling mat was closer to that end zone next to the tunnels and just fill that side as much as you can. There's a legitimate chance you might have to change the logistical layout of what you were going to do with this game and open up more. It's wild.
It's very reminiscent of you and I would have gone to probably some basketball games at UNI when they would have played at the Dome before the center was built, and that was always kind of a structural, trying to figure out how to do it for certain games. I know the Iowa game against UNI, they would often take down some of the curtains and really open it up so they could fill the whole dome if they could.
Panthers won, I think that was that 06 game against Horner and Bruner in that team. I think Iowa was ranked 12. I was at that game as a fan. That was wild. They stormed the court inside the Unidome. It was it was a wild scene, but that was the only way you could accommodate the amount of fans that wanted to come to the game.
And what's crazy about that, just numbers-wise, the dome fits somewhere between 13 and 14,000 people, I think. And so, again, just already more than doubled the amount of people that were in the dome. For those men's games, we've already got that surpassed by twofold what they're going to see in that women's game.
We just need halfway decent weather. I think I remember being at Kinnick, and Mike, you were there in November 25th. It was a nice day out. It was a little chilly, but it wasn't terrible.
Yeah, it was. It got a little cold during the Minnesota game, but the wrestling meet was, it was sunny. It was perfect.
It was 11 a.m., something like that, wasn't it?
Something around noon, yeah. I was tailgating hard, so memory's a little foggy.
Can't condone that. No.
It is wild. Pray for good weather. It's just that would be just such a shame if that doesn't come to fruition the way that they're wanting it to.
It's so cool to hear Beth point out. It's basically Lisa Bluter's idea a couple weeks after the final. Her gears don't stop turning.
Lisa was there today sitting in on the press conference.
Just got back from Europe too, right?
Yeah, just 12 hours ago, she said.
Jet lagged and sitting in on a presser.
She's coming out there. She and Jan were both in there.
Sure.
I wanted to ask Lisa afterwards. She kind of took off right after Beth was done, but I wanted to ask her, okay, is that true or is that apocryphal that you were the one who, this is your brainchild? But that's the way she made it sound, is that Lisa came to her after the Final Four, hey, let's try this out. So I don't know. That may be her. That may have been somebody else in the athletic department that initially started the ball rolling on that. But I'd be curious if that is indeed Lisa's baby.
I do hope, for the sake of the fairy tale of it or the mysticism of it, that it wasn't some sort of ticket office of what if we put him in Kinnick?
Yeah.
That Lisa comes back after seeing everything she saw in Dallas, and that red carpet walk will forever be just. That's an ultimate Hawkeye moment, that she comes back and says, we can take this to Kinnick. For her to just have that vision, you'd love to see her, imagine her having that epiphany somewhere in Dallas, while all this is happening, going, we could fill a football stadium with this team. And Caitlin Clark, Beth talked about her a little bit too, of just what an impactful athlete and impactful person. She kept coming back to the people and the humanity of so many people within the University of Iowa athletic department and the community at large being such a big part of why she wanted to come here, and then saying that her expectations have been surpassed. So
that's such a fun part about having Beth step into this role as Iowa's first female athletic director, is that women's sports, especially at the University of Iowa and in the state of Iowa, are on such a big stage right now that it's fun to have her stepping into that.
Dr. Christine Grant obviously was women's athletic when the departments were separate, but she has the opportunity to be the first since Dr. Grant, and then certainly the first to oversee men's athletics in that interim role right now. But again, as we talked about, certainly the front runner, and it feels like it's her full-time job to lose. And again, a lot on her plate and already doing a lot of stuff 16 days into her tenure as interim AD. Beth Goetz, the first time we've heard from her, it certainly will not be the last as we continue to watch her tenure in Iowa City. That is going to do it for this shortened, truncated episode of Eye on the Hawks. We'll be back on Sunday. Getting back into the football stuff, we've got top 25 polls to break down. We've got a few more things to look out from recruiting. We've got stuff to look at from the football side, certainly at the scrimmage as well, continuing to analyze what we saw there. We're getting closer to game day, folks, so we'll keep talking for you and keep thanking you for your support. Continue to rate and subscribe, everything like that, and we'll see you on Sunday.